This is Julio Romo, and welcome to my 247 podcast. Today, I'm in conversation with the BBC's senior world affairs producer, Stuart Hughes. Stuart has an extensive career in journalism with experience of producing some of the leading stories from around the world. He is also a visiting fellow at Bournemouth University's Faculty of Media and Communications and the voice of Brentford Football Club. In this podcast, we talk about the importance of social media and the impact of misinformation on journalism and what communicators can learn to tell better stories. Do follow and subscribe. Stuart Hughes, thanks very much for the time. Stuart, you are Senior World Affairs Producer at the BBC. Over 25 years, obviously, with the organisation, news gathering around the world. Many stories to kind of share. So it's a pleasure to have you. This is the second interview that I'm carrying out in this in conversation. And I just really wanted to start by, obviously, introducing you, but also see if you could tell us a bit more about your career to date.
Thanks, Julio. Thanks for inviting me to talk to you. I started off as a junior researcher at BBC Wales. I grew up in Cardiff and lived there for 18 years before going off to university. And as much as I consider myself Welsh and I'm very patriotic, I didn't ever anticipate starting my career in Wales. But the way things turned out, because I had local knowledge and I knew I wanted to work in journalism, opportunities arose in BBC Wales. And so it seemed crazy not to take them up at that stage of my career in my early 20s. So I worked at BBC Wales for about 3 years and then moved to London and climbed the greasy pole, if you like. I always knew I wanted to work in foreign news. That was my main interest and my main goal. So it took a very long time. Obviously, it's a competitive part of a competitive field to get into, but eventually I managed to claw my way into working in foreign news and have been there ever since. I started off primarily as a radio producer, and then moved into TV. And obviously, as the media landscape has changed so quickly, then I've had to adapt as well. So there's really mostly no such thing as a radio or a TV producer anymore. We are content providers, I guess. We would never use that phrase, but I guess that's what you call us. So on any given day, I could be working on anything from a package for the Today programme to the technical aspects of getting somebody on air to on the World at One, right down to getting a piece on the 10 o'clock news.
And obviously, in that 25 years, as you said, things have changed, and especially the technology has changed. How has the World Affairs team changed, especially in the last number of years with the increase of smartphone journalism and more importantly, obviously, with social media?
I think one of the things I particularly noticed is when social media started to become an increasingly important part of our landscape, it was felt by a lot of correspondents that it was a sort of additional add-on. It was a nice to have. And it was something primarily that they didn't need to really involve themselves in because it was seen as ephemeral. It was seen as not really important to the core job of journalism. Another important factor is that a lot of the correspondents who work in foreign news are there because they've got a lot of experience. And with that they tend to be a bit older. Because certainly within the BBC, you don't get into foreign news as your first job. You've got to build your way up and into it. So when social media became something that we should be taking notice of, and it seems like a lifetime away now, some of these senior correspondents, partly because of their age, thought, well, I don't understand it. I don't need to get involved with it. I'll just ignore it. Now, that's obviously changed now. Everybody from the youngest to the oldest foreign news operative knows that that's the space we need to be in. But the levels of personal involvement and engagement in those channels and the level of understanding of how those channels work and how they can be leveraged and harnessed really varies. It's the skill levels are getting higher all the time. But it may or may not surprise you that there are some correspondents that I work with who are fantastic foreign correspondents with decades of experience who can write the most beautiful piece of copy or produce the most beautiful TV report for the 10 o'clock news, but ask them to engage with an audience on social media, and they wouldn't know where to start. I think those people are the last of their breed, because not having the social media awareness as part of your skill set is no longer going to be acceptable, or it's a generational thing. So I think we're seeing the last of the senior foreign correspondents who don't know how to tweet or don't know how Facebook works. But certainly the people of that generation are still very much active. And I don't want to say that they're has-beens or that they're dead wood, but it's just a sign of of how quickly things have changed. That even within my career, we've seen the skill set that's required in order to be an effective and successful foreign correspondent has changed.
I mean, there certainly is two sides to social and digital, and equally messaging as well. There's obviously the reporting to your audience and letting them know that the latest package is there, but there's equally the news gathering as well. How important is the social area for news gathering, for finding stories, and obviously we're now in an era of misinformation as well?
Yeah, I think in the beginning, social media was seen as sort of like a one-way street for BBC journalists who were working on who were dipping their toes in the water of social. It was basically a chance for them to put links up and say, "Here's my piece on the 10 o'clock news. Click here and watch it again." It was a sort of traditional advert, if you like, but there wasn't a very high level of engagement in that. It was just one-way traffic, and that was fine for a while. And obviously, it was earlier in the evolution of social media. Now, I think there is a greater understanding that being engaged in that space, in that conversation in social media is part of what we do. That putting up links to your pieces on the 10 o'clock news is no longer enough. Different correspondents will engage in that space to different levels, depending on their interests. Some correspondents, understandably, just feel that they haven't got time or the inclination to engage too deeply in that space. Their main priority is still to get the piece on the 10 o'clock news or the Today programme. And that's perfectly understandable. We are not given a job description which says you must tweet or you must be on Facebook. And so for some people, we focus on what is in your job description, which is...
And that's obviously, unlike other news organizations, more the commercial news organization, who obviously is, you capture, you deliver, and you promote the content.
Yeah, and obviously we have different business model. If you are Sky, not only is there the personal branding issue for the individual correspondents, but there is a need to push that content out as widely as you can to as many places as you can in order to draw listeners, viewers, and revenue. We don't have that same impetus because we're a publicly funded commercial organization. So we don't have that commercial imperative to build social audiences to the same extent. Our focus on building social audiences, either at an individual level or on the main BBC accounts, is to drive viewership and listenership. I think on the sides of disinformation and news gathering, again. To begin with, there was a perception that it's only people with too much time on their hands who want to take photographs of their breakfast who are on social media. Obviously, everything has changed completely. I mean, to your audience who are very versed in social media, that will probably they will find that unbelievable that was a perception. But even, I would say, 5 years ago, some journalists who I spoke to would say, I haven't got time to tweet and I can't be bothered because it's just a bunch of people taking selfies. I think that perception has pretty much been swept away now. And we all know that social media is where stories break, where stories develop, where story ideas come from. And so even if some of my colleagues aren't actively engaged in that space in terms of a dialogue and a conversation, they are still more closely monitoring and seeing what's going on in social media because they know that they have to be. And to give you, just to give you a sort of anecdote, which maybe gives you an insight into how the game has changed. You would walk into any newsroom anywhere in the world 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago. Well, if you go back 50 years, you would have the teletype machine with the Reuters and the AP feed in the corner of the room, and it would start rattling, and you knew there was news happening, and you go and rip the copy off. Oh, something important's happening. Let's see what the AP copy is. 5 years ago, you would still log in, and the first thing you would do would be go to AP and Reuters to read the wires. That the stories would break on the wires, the stories would develop on the wires, and that was your go-to place. I now have the wires up. If I want a quick read through of what the latest on a story is, I will go to the wires. But I cannot remember the last time that I saw a breaking news alert on AP or Reuters or AFP that told me something that I didn't already know, having got it from social. So the role of the traditional news agencies is changing massively. I think they are still hugely relevant because they can add value and provide added content. But for us as journalists, the days when we would sit at our desks and wait to see the AP news alert or the Reuters news alert and say, ooh, there's a story, are long gone.
And how obviously you see, as you say, you tend to see a lot more breaking news on social channels. I'm sure you got your keywords all set up for that. From seeing the story, how do you then check the fact that it is a verified story? Do you suddenly have to, can you go to your UGC team, your verification team, to say, this is what's being said, can you verify it? Because that will tell me if I've got a lead here or not.
Well, obviously, I mean, there's two things there. One is that a lot of organizations, be they NGOs, government departments, whoever, state actors, are breaking their news on social media now. So, I'm not saying that we wouldn't see a tweet saying it came from the Iranian Revolutionary Guard's official account and we wouldn't check it out, but it is a primary source. Yeah. It is I use social media very much as my early warning tool. Yeah. And one tool that I find indispensable now is Data Miner. Which I think is absolutely amazing. I mean, I know the energy sector's using it, the business world are using it for business intelligence. The risk management sector are using it for risk intelligence, and we're using it for story intelligence. And the speed and the inventiveness of the algorithms that they're using, the speed at which they're able to spot stories before they're stories, I don't know what goes on under the hood. Obviously, you get some false positives, some negatives, some false information. That's fine because it's an algorithm and it's it still needs the professional judgment. But the way that I use social is I will get an alert on Data Miner, or I will see something that is breaking, and I will go, ooh, there may be something happening here. And then after that, the next stage is to revert to our traditional news gathering techniques, be they pick up the phone and call the authorities or the police or a government department, be it talk to experts in the field, be it talk to the individuals who are tweeting if it's, a story with eyewitness reports. And we do, the stuff we've always done, checking things out. It's just a lot of that checking now takes place in the digital sphere rather than, when I started out in the Radio Wales newsroom where you'd pick up the phone and call the cops.
So obviously data has become key and it's become central. That's going to stay as it is. I'm really, talking about data. Do you look at data specifically with the COVID situation that we find ourselves in, with things over the Atlantic in the US, obviously in South America, and even in China? Obviously, that's got its own social bubble there. How do you look at that, and how do you use data now?
I will confess that a sort of deep understanding of data and data wrangling is the one area that I think certainly in my field of foreign news is still one of our weak spots. I don't think we're alone in that, but again, for your colleagues who are more versed in the deep side of social media, data is the nut that we haven't cracked yet, because we've been so focused on the traditional forms of information gathering, and data is for many foreign correspondents a bit of an unknown quantity. We don't know how to analyze data. We don't know what to do with it. We don't know how to find stories in it because we've never been taught. So I think that is a big weak spot, and it is being addressed. We are investing more in data journalism because there is a realization that it's an important part of the picture now. But I wouldn't say, in my organization, I wouldn't say that process is in its infancy. I'm just saying it hasn't trickled down throughout the newsroom. There are the guys that do data, who know data, but I wouldn't say that everybody has got a bit of data knowledge, or even necessarily realizes that they should have a bit of data knowledge. So I think that's the big unaddressed area at the moment. But what we are aware of is how others are using data very effectively. So during COVID-19, the Johns Hopkins modeling, the stuff that the FT have been doing, which is fantastic, the stuff that The Economist has been doing with data, we are all watching that and taking note of it and reading the graphs and reading the analysis. I suppose it started with Nate Silver that we started seeing how data could be used in a news gathering context. We haven't taken that next step so much and are actually doing the data crunching ourselves. It is happening, but as I say, it's happening in silos. But I think that will change. But given the high quality of the news information that's come out of data from COVID-19, as I say, with people like the FT, that we realise that is newsworthy and something that we should be, again, educating ourselves in and getting our skills up in.
I gather that obviously in international news gathering, that personal relationship has always been a central point, and very important in getting the story, equally in verifying the story as well, even if you're having off-the-record chats there. But obviously COVID has stopped that. How much has COVID affected that ability to have that personal, that one-to-one conversation? Have things pivoted more towards messaging, to WhatsApp, Telegram, and other ways? And that has that damaged trust between, say, you and your own contacts there?
No, I think the opposite, actually. Certainly in my field, I work in the field of, particularly the field of diplomacy and foreign affairs. Mm-hmm. That is all about personal connections, personal contacts. At its simplest, it's the brushing up against somebody in the House of Commons tea room and gossiping, obviously, and finding a story. That side of things has clearly ground to a halt. That's not happening at the moment. Also, huge store is still placed amongst the colleagues that I work with on access. The fact that not even press officers and PR people, but government ministers or senior government advisors will return your calls. Mm-hmm. That is prized, nurtured, and very jealously guarded, those connections. And those connections have still continued under lockdown. We are still able to communicate, just albeit not face to face. But one of the things I found, and it's been really interesting in the last couple of months, is whereas the whole of the world has contracted and narrowed and closed down, the positive side for us as journalists is people are more available potentially than they've ever been before. Because if you're trying to talk to someone senior in a government department or an NGO or a CEO of an NGO or whoever it may be, the chances are they're sitting at their desktops the same as you are. So whereas it would previously have taken you a month to set up a meeting or a coffee, now we'll WhatsApp them and they'll say, oh, pop onto Zoom, we'll have a chat. So that access, although still guarded and privileged, is in some ways easier because people are have been more available. So there is the potential there, and I don't think this is all going to suddenly disappear after lockdown ends. I think people have got used to this new way of communicating. I think people will potentially have more time we'll still have time for some of those conversations. And I can see in the future, for the sort of work I do, the sort of relationship between reported and reporters will be a more mixed hybrid, if you like, of personal contact in the times that we can have those coffees and those breakfast meetings, but also a lot of the chat will be directly changed as a result of COVID and our new mindset that we can say, okay, we'll go to the breakfast meeting because it would be good to shake hands or fist bump with somebody. Mm-hmm. But then a month from now, we'll just pop up and jump on Zoom for 10 minutes and do that as well.
Have people become more open to chat overseas as well?
Yeah. I think to give one example, I was putting together a piece about China and China's wolf warriors a few weeks ago. Mm-hmm. And in this new way of working, the interviews that I did were largely done or scheduled out of necessity because we were in the height of lockdown, and doing face-to-face interviews just was virtually impossible, full stop. But in the course of about 3 hours, after pre-scheduling some Zoom chats, I was able to talk to a think tank policy person in Europe and a think tank policy person in Washington and get interviews with great insights and in audio and video. And I did everything that I needed for a TV and radio package. I got all the interviews in the space of a few hours. That is an absolute game changer for me. Setting up and doing those interviews in normal times we would have staggered them over the course of 2 or 3 days, and we did it in 2 or 3 hours, which was remarkable. So by the time I got to 5 o'clock on that day recording, I said, blimey, this afternoon we've done everything that we need to get this piece together. That normally would have taken us days. And that's fantastic because it means we can do more efficiently. And from the audience's point of view, the days when people would frown or turn up their nose because an interview was on Zoom or done down the line from someone's bedroom, COVID has blown all of that away completely. And I can't stress enough to people who don't work in the broadcast industry how much of a obsession that was for program editors. Oh, the interview with, even if it was with a relatively minor figure or just somebody, say an academic, that interview has to be beautifully lit. It has to be beautifully shot. It has to have 2 cameras on it. You can't have any distractions in the background. You have to have a craft cameraman with £10,000 worth of equipment shooting it. Now, that's just, even now, a few months down, that thinking just seems so obsolete because we know that people don't care anymore. It's not they don't care because they are flippant. They don't care because they know it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter if you have an MP on air talking from his bedroom. We're used to it now. So that is, I think, one of the big game changers from this experience, that a lot of the grunt work of actually getting the material in the can is going to be a whole lot easier in the months ahead. And I don't think the lessons that we've learned from this period are going to go away. We know that this is the way to do things from now.
But do you think in some way that certain countries are using COVID to regain a lot more control on the narrative that they wish to push?
Yeah, I mean, I did quite a big piece a few weeks ago on China's wolf warriors, and that is exactly the area in which you're talking about. Mm-hmm. You know, the way that state actors are changing the way that they're using social media. You could call it misinformation, disinformation. I would just call it propaganda or government comms. Call it what you will. But clearly, you know, if you take China as a small example, the way that they're using social media for their comms has changed from reactive to proactive, and it's got a lot more muscular and will continue to be muscular. It's not, as one person said, it's not cute panda pictures anymore. Mm-hmm. They're getting out there and pushing their message in a muscular way. The tweets that senior government officials, be they from China, Britain, or Russia, or anywhere in the world, are sending are not, please check out my new press release anymore. They are pushing their narratives directly on social media. We're still getting used to that. It's relatively new. We're still getting used to how governments are evolving to use social media in a different way. But we're certainly aware of it, and we're certainly taking a very close interest in it, because we know how much message shaping and narrative shaping is now taking place through those channels. And those channels will be different depending on which country the particular person is from and which country they're aiming at.
Are you able to deliver more insight to more people?
Well, at the moment, certainly for the last couple of months, it's been a bit difficult, because our main focus has just been to keep the show on the road, keep the stuff on air. So we genuinely haven't had time to think more widely about how can we harness this, how can we leverage this new normal to change the way that we tell stories. Our main focus has been, and still is, don't fall off air. Mm-hmm. How are we going to fill the program when we can't physically get to a lot of people? How are we going to make a piece for the 10 o'clock news when we can't physically get to people? What pictures are we going to get? How is our television visual grammar going to have to change, given that most of the pieces that you're going to see on air is going to be somebody talking to somebody else on a laptop, which isn't particularly good telly. And I think we're seeing a lot of innovations, creative innovations in the grammar of television over the last few months, because our very skilled camera people are saying, well, look, I've just seen 6 pieces in the last 2 days with a correspondent staring down the barrel of a laptop. That's getting boring now. Mm-hmm. So let's change the visual grammar. What else can we do that's going to make it a bit more interesting to look at? So that's a work in progress very much, that I think is going to continue massively. But in terms of how are we going to use this to change the way that we deliver content, we're not quite there yet, because we are starting to get step back a bit from the height of crisis mode, but we're still at level 4.5, I would say, in terms of our crisis, because overnight the BBC went from a very newsroom-based, centralised way of working, with up to 6,000 journalists in a physical building at any given day, to 600 journalists in the building in any given day, and the rest working remotely. That is a massive undertaking. It has got to be the largest, fastest change to our working practices in the BBC's history. So perhaps people can be a little bit, forgive us a little bit if we haven't had time to think the big thoughts yet. They will come. They're starting to come, because we're getting our workflows down, the system's bedding down. People are understanding much more the benefits and the negatives of this new way of working. And then the next stage, as lockdown continues to ease, and things get back to normal, and also as we start to the news agenda starts to move away from wall-to-wall COVID, I think we're going to then have a chance to start thinking about, well, we did this for COVID, so maybe we could do it for a story about Russia, or we could do it as a story about China. So it doesn't have to be just COVID stories. But that's very much, we're at the early stages of that.
Do you think that comms people, advisors are moving in the way in which they engage with you now, and they obviously put forward content given the situation that we find ourselves in, or are they still in PR 1.0?
No, I think they're having the same discussions and challenges as we are. Government departments have all had to go to remote working overnight. So again, just as hopefully people will forgive us for not being necessarily particularly innovative yet, we understand that government departments haven't had a chance to do that, because they've got all of their people working from home as well. They're working out their systems as well. So it's probably a little too much to ask of any of us to have any big long-term thoughts about how we're going to use this, or how we're going to change as a result. That's all still to come. And I wouldn't expect anybody, either us or a government department, to be starting to roll out brand new comm strategies in the middle of a crisis. They've done certain things very well. They're now setting up virtual meetings, virtual press conferences. Took a little while, took us all a little while. Just the same as, our kids at school. It took the schools a little while to work out how they're going to deliver things remotely. So I think for the comms people, it's taken them a little while to work out how to deliver things remotely. But we're all getting used to it now. We know how to do it. We know that we can set up a Zoom lunchtime meeting. We know that we can set up a Q&A with somebody in a session via Zoom relatively quickly and cheaply. 3 months ago, we certainly wouldn't have done that. So the interesting thing now is going to be how we all in our various areas of work now develop that to the next stage.
Stuart, I think we could be talking for hours. So I'm just going to leave it with one more question. Are you missing international travel?
I am. And before lockdown, about half of my time was spent on the road, and half of it was spent in London. At the risk of sounding like somebody who just wants to sit in business class and drink champagne, which I would stress I certainly don't do on the BBC's budget, I know that's not going to happen for the foreseeable future. And in many ways, I don't want it to happen because a lot of my work is crash sends, last-minute phone calls, get on a plane, across time zones, last-minute deadlines. And the thought of spending 4 hours at the airport before I take off to get my temperature taken, and then all of having to wear a mask on a 12-hour flight, and everything that goes with it. And then when I get to wherever I'm going, having the new protocols in place to work, frankly, I don't want that. So I miss... on the one level, I miss somebody making my bed in a hotel room. I miss the beautiful Asian buffets at the Shangri-La Hotel in Singapore.
Very nice.
I miss them hugely, and I'm looking forward to getting back to them because one of the there were often a number of highlights of any given year in my foreign news calendar. One of them would be, it was always wonderful to go to Shangri-La Dialogue because I got to stay at the Shangri-La, which I love. I always loved going to the UN General Assembly because I loved spending September in New York. And I know I'm not going to do any of those things next year. I know I loved going to the G7 summits because even though the summits were very formulaic, you got to go to some nice places. That's not going to happen in the foreseeable future. So on the one hand, I miss all of that. I miss the travel. I miss the experience. But in the current climate, I don't miss it at all because I know trying to do what we did before, given the restrictions and the protocols that are in place now, are going to be more trouble than they're worth. So for me, I made a couple of actually decisions in the last week or so in terms of realizing the way things are going to be for the foreseeable future. One of them is I've downgraded my British Airways Amex card because I know that there's no point collecting all those Avios at the moment because I'm not going to be able to use them. So why should I spend £200 on my credit card fee to collect Avios that I'm not going to be used? So I've bitten that bullet and realised that there's not a lot of benefit in collecting many Avios at the moment. And I've also, I'm talking to you from my study sort of shed. I call it the news shed. It's where I'm working at the moment. I've got all the facilities here. And I've just decided to do a big revamp and upgrade of that in the coming months and spend some money on News Shed 2.0 because I know this is where I'm going to be working for the foreseeable future. So although I miss the days when I could quickly get on a plane and go somewhere, the thought of spending a little while longer in a newly refreshed and decorated news shed, I think at the moment is equally exciting.
I'm looking forward to following the updates and the upgrade of News Shed 2.0. Stuart, thanks very much for the time. It's been a pleasure as always. Thanks.